I'm a former engineer that has ultimately switched over to tech sales, and when I left engineering, I looked at both the sales engineering and the tech sales path. So I wanted to shed light on both my decision, but also if you're in a similar situation, or maybe you're trying to break into tech for the first time, setting expectations around what a sales engineer actually does, what someone in tech sales, a more specific sales role actually does, and also the qualifications required when looking at both. There's high earning potential on both paths, and it's not a matter of one being better versus the other, but I do think there's a lot of people coming into this process very new to it that fundamentally don't understand the requirements needed to get into either path and what is required long-term to be successful in the role. So I wanted to quickly talk about my experience as well. I am rather technical. I still have the ability to write basic code. I haven't written code in a long time, but there's elements I think I would do well if I decided to go in that sales engineering route. But for me, ultimately, the tech sales path made the most sense. I wanted the highest upside, and I really didn't want to get caught up and bogged down in all of the engineering work. Look, again, it's great work, and I think there's people that are much better suited to do that. And I saw with my competitive background, with my athletic background, I really wanted to be on the front line of the sales team and really go that route in terms of breaking into accounts, doing some of the more grunt work that maybe engineers don't necessarily want to do, like cold calling, emailing. That stuff didn't really bother me. But I will say there are times, many times even now, where sales engineering has a lot of appeal. If you have that engineering background, it's such a defendable job. It's so difficult to find engineers that can talk eloquently about a solution, that can take a customer-facing interaction and bring in the relevant technical points and guide a customer through from maybe high-level features to very in-depth features. That is such a unique skill set that it's very hard to replace. And like I mentioned in other videos, I have friends that are sales engineers that are getting offers left and right, even now, amidst all the turmoil in the tech market, etc. It's a great job to have, but there is lower earning potential. And as we get into looking at the different earning potential, the different responsibilities, I do want to talk a little bit about the qualifications up front, because a lot of my peers maybe in sales kind of had this dream of going to a sales engineering role, or maybe people breaking in for the first time want to go straight into sales engineering, and while not impossible, it's very difficult. A lot of times on the sales engineering side, there's a few minimum requirements. It will depend based on the company you're going to, etc. But a lot of times they minimally want to see an engineering type of degree or maybe a boot camp. Those are totally valid as well, like a coding boot camp, etc. But oftentimes, even with sales engineering, they like to hire people that have a year of actual engineering experience, like direct engineering experience, because they're coming from that environment where they were in a direct engineering role, they were interacting with similar tools, and now when they go to sell and talk about deeper features with engineers, they've been in that place already. Again, not impossible, but I will tell you as a high-level summary, the barrier to entry for a sales engineer is usually higher than a direct tech sales role like an SDR, like an account executive. They want to see that STEM degree, they want to see that coding bootcamp and or direct experience for a year or two in a direct engineering, non-sales related role before going into that. Again, in an ideal scenario. But I will give you a counterexample. A colleague of mine that worked at the last company that I was at was kind of in between that decision themselves. They had a software engineering background, but they wanted to go into sales engineering and sales, and they ultimately elected for an SDR job. But that being said, they got into the SDR job for 5 months, didn't enjoy it, and switched to another company as a sales engineer because they had that sales experience. So my point being, there's no one path, but I will tell you straight up that the easiest way to break into tech sales is usually that SDR path. Now, there are companies that don't require a college degree. I will tell you, as you go to the more highly technical companies and the Fortune 500 companies, unfortunately right now, there really is just a requirement for a college degree or relevant past experience of maybe 3 to 5 years in the tech world. So not impossible without a degree, but if you don't have a degree, you don't have past experience, I wouldn't necessarily try to go to these very large tech companies. But again, there are many companies, there's many startups, high growth startups, etc., that are open to candidates that don't have a degree, maybe have sales experience in a different domain. Because the SDR job, the important thing is you have to come in, you have to learn a lot, and you have to have the drive to succeed, to get rejected a lot. And a lot of engineers that maybe have that technical background to understand the tech at a greater depth don't really want to do those cold calls, don't really want to do those emails, get rejected all the time, etc. So it's a unique position where you can find your way into a company with less experience, but it definitely is a prove it kind of position. You have to succeed and have success over a sustained period of time to progress your career, to get to those higher levels of sales as an account executive, as an enterprise account executive, where your income can really see some impressive numbers around 250, 300,000 plus per year. So all that to say, again, going back to my thought process, right? I was an engineer for 3 years, and really by the the time I got done with engineering, I was just so sick of it, I didn't want to have anything to do with it. There were numerous different reasons for it. There were parts of the job I enjoyed, right? But I came from a competitive background, I came from a sports background, and in sports, obviously you have to prove yourself, you have to compete for roster spots, you have to compete against your opponents, and I really wasn't having that itch really scratched or satisfied in a direct engineering role. I also, again, it's just more my personality. While I'm not here to say F the man and like F corporate America, I really didn't like going from a situation where I was, again, kind of competing on my own, proving myself on my team, proving myself against competitors, and then I go to this engineering environment where I'm largely told what I have to do, I'm largely judged on criteria that I didn't set, whereas sales, a pure sales role, gave me a great outlet in a corporate setting to have very tangible goals, very tangible outcomes I could strive for and exceed. Because at the end of the day, you know, there's numerous different metrics that make salespeople successful, but ultimately 80+% of your success is evaluated on the revenue that you're able to close, right? And so it's much more easy and much more tangible to just go out and get it done, do what you need to do to succeed in the role. And I think for many athletes, whether it's tech sales, med device, or other avenues of sales, they find that fulfillment in corporate America in sales because of that kind of objective and because of that structure in a corporate role. Now again, I think there are many elements I would enjoy of a sales engineering role, but the upside and financial side is a little bit more limited. You have less commission component, which is nice, right? Because a salesperson may have 50% as base salary, 50% based on their performance, where a sales engineer may have 70 to 80% of their salary as base, basically guaranteed, and maybe 20 to 30% of that as variable. So you are getting a healthier paycheck up front. You don't have to subject yourself to maybe losses or things that are out of your control that happen sometimes in the sales world, where you've been working on a deal for 6 months and the company cuts budget, or you've been working on a deal for a year and the person who was about to buy left the company, right? These are things that sales individuals are really subjected to, that you are protected from on the sales engineering side. But when I really got into it, there was also an element of sales engineering where there was still that component of me having to take orders from other people. And it's not that cut and dry. Again, I think sales engineering would have been a better role than a direct engineering role anyhow, but there's still an element of, if I am responsible, as an example, to help a customer or a potential customer test our product, I'm now gonna have to work however long it took. I'm now going to have to adhere to their criteria, whereas in sales, I'm coming in and trying to bridge the gap of what they think they need versus what they really need and how our product solves that, right? And that's a much more creative challenge to me. It's a much more stimulating challenge for me, whereas sales engineering, you get some of that, don't get me wrong. You still have that ability to come in, show them how their problem maps to your solution, things of this nature, but it is a little bit more limited in scope, and you have a much more structured workday, whereas sales, I mean, yes, there are things that you need to do repeatedly to be successful, but you have even more autonomy, even more freedom to make it happen. So I guess if there's any meta abstraction from this, again, there's no right answer, right? At the highest levels of sales engineering, your salary can be maybe 200 to 250,000. Again, I mentioned on that 70-30 or 80-20 split. So you do have more guaranteed salary, you do have less risk, and like I mentioned, the skill set is highly, highly coveted. I can't think of a situation where if you're a sales engineer with 3 to 5 years of experience, where you couldn't find a job within a month at a maximum if, God forbid, something happened, you were laid off or whatever. Whereas sales, I mean, yes, if you're a highly skilled salesperson, you have a track record of success, you should be fine, but there's also more risk, right? Like I mentioned, especially at the enterprise level, you're working deals that are maybe anywhere from 6 to 18 months long to get finalized, and there's a lot of reward with that, but there's a lot of inherent risk. If you spend 18 months and the CEO of a company, the VP you're working with, leaves the company, you lose all your progress and you're back at zero almost immediately, right? These are the types of extreme risks that you do expose yourself to in a direct sales role. For me, that wasn't an issue. I've been used to that. You know, I've been used to competing, trying to exceed at a very high level, and I was okay subjecting myself to a little more risk that came with more upside. And as I mentioned in tech sales, even if my salary is $300,000, which is great, don't get me wrong, 50% of that is base and guaranteed, where the other 50% I have to go make happen. So there's less of a guaranteed salary component with a direct sales role. For me, again, yes, having that upside was a great decision, but I also wasn't in a position where I'm like counting pennies and saying, okay, if I was a sales engineer for 5 years or whatever. For me, I think it's more about the personality fit. Overall, tech sales is gonna be the best path for me long-term, and I kind of saw that regardless of the specific dollar amount. But again, you know, the tech sales role has a lot more autonomy, and especially at the enterprise level, you're not doing as much of the cold calling, as much of the emailing, whereas you're now getting more strategic, you're more planning how to work into accounts, you're putting a lot of effort on much higher quality and higher risk deals. Whereas, especially at the entry level of sales, it's definitely more of a grind. You're making a lot of calls, a lot of emails, but if you can get over that hump, if you can find success repeatedly and keep moving up, that upside was worth it to me. Whereas sales engineering, a great career and something I think I would enjoy maybe maybe in a different life, or I don't know, 10 years from now, if I'm tired of the whole sales thing in a direct sales role, I could definitely see myself really enjoying sales engineering. But again, the barrier to entry is a little bit higher, and also your long-term upside, while you'll make a very healthy and comfortable salary, and I think it's a great career path, it's a little bit less than that direct sales role. You have a little less of a chance of maybe those sales years where you hear top reps making $500,000, $1 million a year. That's not quite going to happen in a sales engineering role. But I digress. Again, there's no right or wrong path here. I wanted to give you perspective because somehow, some way, I'm kind of uniquely qualified to talk about it with my engineering background. But I wish you the best. If you have any questions, feel free to comment below. I'm happy to help and kind of give you some guidance based on my own experience. But we will see you in the next video. Appreciate it.